Good morning, everyone. We'll get started in just a couple minutes.
Good morning.
Good morning, Tony. Mike, did you have any luck getting in touch with Irene?
Yes, her computer is having difficulty right now, so it is being worked on. It tried to do an update or something, so she's doing her best to get on. But I just got off the phone with her.
Thank you.
Hello, Rob.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Are most of the people that's on, you can't see them?
So this is being conducted as a webinar, so just the panelists are visible, Rob.
I
We
see.
have
Okay.
folks in the attendance in the audience. About 31 people right now are signed in as attendees.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
Welcome. Well, by my clock, it's 10 o'clock, so I'd like to call this meeting to order. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to MRC's regular quarterly board meeting. I'm Karen Facel, president of the board, and we have with us today as panelists all of our board members, I think save one who's having some computer difficulties. Our executive director, Mike Carroll, and technical consultant, George Aronson, our legal counsel, John Pottle. We have a couple communications folks that are helping run this meeting and taking notes. And we also have Rob Van Naarden, who's the CEO of Delta Thermo, who we'll be hearing from shortly. So thank you very much for joining us. Our first item on today's agenda is approval of the agenda. And I didn't know if anybody had any comments or corrections that we needed to make to the agenda today. If so, if you could let me know verbally, since I can't see everyone. All right, hearing no corrections needed, we'll assume it is approved as written and presented. The next item on the agenda, and our first item, is a presentation on the sale and reopening of the Hampden facility. And we have both Mike Carroll, MRC's executive director, and Rob Van Naarden, CEO of Delta Thermo, who will be providing short presentations today, which will be followed by a question and answer period. We will be using the Q&A feature of the webinar to take questions. So I encourage you, if you have questions, to begin putting those into the Q&A feature, and we'll address them as they come through at the end during the Q&A session. So with that, I will hand it over to Mike, who I believe is going to kick it off, and then pass the baton to Rob when he's done with his presentation.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you everybody for attending. Jesse, can you go to the first slide, please? So I just wanted to present to you about where things are at. So MRC's role, it is important to remember this was not MRC's facility to sell. But with that said, MRC plays a significant role in the process as the landlord, waste permit holder, and waste supply contract assigner. His focus during this lengthy negotiation has always been looking out for our members' best interest and reopen the Hampden facility that will allow member communities access to safe, sustainable, efficient, and affordable management of their MSW with a maximum diversion. If it weren't for the strength in numbers of the MRC, we would not be here today presenting to you this positive update on the sale of the Hampden facility. Some of the things MRC has negotiated into the agreements, but are not limited to, are operating plan. MRC must approve the DTE operational plan for the Hampden facility. We have worked with DTE on this and are happy with DTE's current plan. The current plan is more of a milestone platform and schedule that Rob will cover in more detail in his presentation. Monthly meetings. MRC will be present for monthly stakeholder meetings with DET. This will give both parties an open line of communication and a chance to share information and review the facility's progress. MRC also needs to assign agreements to DTE, which we are happy to say we have no increase in tipping fee once the deal is complete. Agreements from MRC being assigned to DTE in this transaction are the site lease, master waste supply agreement, waste disposal agreement, waste acceptance interruption agreement, and cash collateral agreement. Next slide, please, Jesse. MRC considerations. We have spent countless hours working on this deal. All three parties, bondholder trustee, DTE, and the MRC, are in the final stages of completing this transaction. The documents required for this very complex deal was a massive undertaking to ensure everything was covered. All additional documents such as assigned contracts and amendments were attached to the new agreements. With that said, over the last year, MRC has had significant expense, whether it be for legal fees, technical consulting, or keeping the current permits in compliance. MRC was able to work with DTE and negotiate full reimbursement to be paid at the closing for principal and interest of the MRC loan provided to Coastal, MRC's costs due to the CRM defaults in securing the Hampden facility, MRC transaction cost, and additional bypass cost. Next slide. Fundamental matters. Fundamental matters basically means that we have some items in the current waste supply or lease agreement that either party has requested a change to during the negotiation. This requires the MRC to notify its members of these fundamental matters. There are three fundamental matters that the MRC will be sending notices out to the members. One, option to purchase the land. In the current lease agreement, the MRC land could be purchased at the end of the initial term by CRM if MRC decided not to extend the term. DTE would like to see that opportunity come sooner. This type of acquisition, lenders want the option of the land ownership as part of the collateral. To obtain financing, DTE needs to show the lender a path to land ownership. This is just an option that they are requesting be added to the agreement. The land sale will not happen until DTE shows long-term reliability, stable operations of the Hampden facility without bypass for 9 consecutive months, including the months of July and August. Remember, the sale of the land would not happen for some time, and DTE is not required to purchase it, but would have the option to do so in the future. Number 2, rebates. In the current agreement, rebates were based on CRM's performance. Their gross revenues had to hit a minimum of $16 million per year before rebates would even kick in. With recycling markets fluctuating and the unknowns in the waste industry, it was never clear when MRC rebates would ever start or even if they would ever be achieved. We want to change the rebate language in the formula to a much simpler plan called shared tipping fees. The shared tipping fees program would start up once the 9-month performance test was achieved. DTE would give back a specific dollar amount per ton. That would take all the unknowns out of the equations that we face with the current program and allow a much simpler program. And finally, term. This is actually 2 fundamental matters because it refers to 2 of the agreements. DTE is asking to reset the clock on the current master waste supply and the current lease agreement. We are currently into these 2 agreements now, just over a year and a half. Purchaser and most likely financer would like to see these agreements back to the initial 15-year term, which would be very helpful in their investment. Next slide, please. Next slide, Jesse. Where do we go from here? Fundamental matter notices will be sent out to the members this week. The notifications will review all the fundamental matters I just went over in the previous slide to include more detail on each subject, reference to the MRC, which will reference each fundamental matter will reference the MRC bylaw it observes, and then it will provide members with instruction. Next, DTE Financer signs off on final form agreements. Next, the court will appoint a receiver to be boots on the ground and execute the sale of the Hampden facility. And finally, a closing date will be scheduled. That wraps it up for me. I want to thank you all for listening and also for your patience in this whole process. Just a reminder, we will be taking questions through the Q&A feature at the end of the presentation. Now it is my pleasure to introduce and welcome Mr. Rob Van Naarden, CEO of Delta Thermo Inc., to present to the MRC board and the members. Rob, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Karen, for giving us the opportunity to chat with your members. Before I start with this slide of what's been happening, I do want to thank everyone, and the members should know that although this has been a arduous negotiations that's taken some time, I know that everybody's heart is in the right place, and that means getting this facility up and running as fast as we can to meet the demands of the member community. So with that said, we spent some time, as you can imagine, over the last couple of months, winterizing the project because with the temperatures up in Maine, as you all are well aware, we wanted to preserve and make sure nothing happened to the existing equipment, both inside the building and outside the building. So we maintained the building at 60 degrees. Inside and outside, we used a special kind of tape, heat tape, to secure all the necessary valves and pipes so that they wouldn't freeze. And that was accomplished. There was absolutely no damage. And that's a really gratifying thing. We've done a significant amount of due diligence on the facility, so we knew to the, not 100%, but very close, to understand what we were buying, both in terms of equipment, how it's supposed to run, and so forth and so on. I think we have a very good understanding. We've reviewed all the engineering drawings and documents, manuals, all the equipment, meaning service manuals, operational manuals, spare parts. We've talked to many of the suppliers of these pieces of equipment, both on the front end and the back end. So that we think we know what we need to do day one to get in there and start to make this thing work. From a staffing point of view, we've interviewed all the former employees on site. We asked them to come in, those at least that want to return, of which I think most of them do, and so that we could make our own assessment as to whether or not we want to bring them back. And in fact, we do. In a majority of the cases, we will bring them back. And it's been a very cooperative effort. Our HR manager, Carroll Wallace, who I think may be on the line, is heading that effort. And so we will talk a little bit more about how the staffing will go once we get in there. We've drafted a startup plan, meaning what are the steps we need to take day one, and we will ramp up the production or execution of taking waste over the next 9 to 12 months once we get in and own the facility. And as you can imagine, we can't turn it on and take a couple of 100 tons day one. That's just not practical. But we will, start with, maybe 20 tons and 50 tons, 100 tons, and ramp it fairly rapidly. So I feel that we can meet the requirements of both the testing procedures as well as the production facility features and meet the performance goals. We believe that we will take the full intake, meaning all of the tonnage that is required, within 12 months. I'm hoping that we can do it a lot sooner. It's certainly my objective and my team's objective to do so. And so that's what we're working hard at doing. Now my team, by the way, has been up there multiple times, and they're actually there today. Zane Crowley, who is our VP of Operations, and Carroll Wallace, who I just mentioned, our HR manager and training manager, are up there as we speak, and they're probably on the Zoom call in some form from the conference room at the facility. We've also had to review all the acquisition legal documents, which, as you can imagine, I could show them to you, but I think that's not necessary. I think it's up to 103 pages, so it's a lot to read and go over, make sure everybody's covered, both on your side and our side, because this is really a cooperative thing. We have to develop a team spirit, we have to develop open transparency, and we have to develop a working relationship day in, day out, and that's really important to us. And to give it even more thought, one of the things I'd like to just mention, Mike has mentioned these monthly meetings, and that's great. And we'll certainly participate. I want to create a citizens advisory board on top of that, which would mean representatives from the communities that come and visit us on a regular basis, whether it's monthly or quarterly. That's really a decision of once we define who they are. Now, obviously, there are 115 municipalities, so having 115 people is not workable. But if we can manage to get it down to like 7 or 8 people, I think it would be valuable to walk the facility with us rather than these Zoom calls or monthly calls. So we'll put together a citizens advisory board with Mike and Karen, and the real objective of that is to make sure that we listen to what the concerns and issues are with the communities. I know that'll come out in your meetings too, Mike, but I like to get a personal feel and touch, if you mean. And finally, the closing is expected in June. I certainly hope it'll come as early in June as possible because we're anxious to jump in. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. I mentioned that my team is there again this week. They'll be there for at least a week. Some of our other people, travel being somewhat difficult, but my technical lead, Matthew Song, who I don't think is on the call today, will be traveling in from California. Matthew is one of the key ingredients to our team because he's the technical lead and also the actual inventor of our water treatment system, which we'll put in sometime later. So the current equipment that's installed, we need to start, starting it up and feeling how they work. We already know some things that need to be replaced, which we'll order immediately the day of acquiring the facility. Carroll this week will start to hand out all the formal employment applications for those people that are interested in joining us. And those are really principally the previous employees. We've already started working with our insurance brokers to work out a comprehensive package of benefits. And when I say comprehensive, it will be comprehensive. I believe deep in my heart that you have to treat your employees like family. So we will make sure that the benefits package is better than they've ever had before at this facility. Maybe they've not at another employer, but that is being worked on as we speak. And I'm very proud of the fact that Carol's doing a fantastic job putting that all together. We'll complete our startup plan, and as I mentioned, the preliminary is already done. And I think we can get that done, the startup plan, before we take control. Then we're going to also finalize an improvement plan because we want to make some modifications and changes to the facility. Nothing that would affect our permits, but at least make some modifications to make it more efficient. We've seen some areas already that need some changes, and we can go through that if anybody has a specific question. The start date, hopefully for bringing employees online, is hopefully around Monday, June 14th, assuming we close right before that. That's my objective. We will originally have about 15 people that'll come on immediately, plus our DTE corporate folks, which is about 4. And those 15 people are really the top end of the management scheme for the entire facility, because we want to go through some comprehensive training and just corporate culture type things as well. The total number of full-time employees, FTEs, will be about 42. And we'll run a combination of 12-hour shifts and 8-hour shifts, depending on the employees' job description. Some will work 12 hours a day, 4 days a week. Some will work 8 hours, 5 days a week. And of course, we're going to be operating 7 days a week, 24/7. And that's important. So we have to have overlap. And we've already actually worked out the schedule for all the job functions. Zane has done a fabulous job in doing that. Zane Crowley, our VP of Operations, who's on the line somewhere there, although I don't see him. But that's the next steps. I think that's the last slide, is it not, Mike? No, milestones. Thank you. So I use this convention quite typically, but T0 means the day of the closing, which I hope will be in the first week of June or second week of June at the latest. We will get the MRF, the front end, the optical sorting system, which needs some changes and updates. We think we can get it tested and working within 30 days. That means that at least on the front end of the system, we can start taking waste in and testing it. And I believe we can do that very quickly. It actually all depends on, there are a number of pieces of equipment we have to change and add, and assuming the availability is within that time frame, I think we can do it. And we're getting great support from some of the manufacturers that we've already talked to. We will start to test the back end, the wet process, the process that makes the pulp. And we think at the current time, don't really know until you turn it on, that we can get that done within 120 days. By the way, this is cumulative, so 120 days from T0. And then we will start taking in a limited amount of MSW in 180 days. And I'm hopeful that I can improve to you that I can do it faster, and then a full load from all the municipalities within 9 months. I put this schedule out there because I need you to understand my philosophy in both business and running these kind of plants. And that is very simply, I want to set your expectations to the point that I can perform better. So you may think that some of this is lengthy, and it is. I believe in under-reporting and overperforming. Sorry, I said that backwards. That was almost a big mistake. But what I mean is, I want to report to you on a regular basis of what we're doing, and I hope to improve on that every single day. I want to meet the obligations and the performance goals and your expectations, and even more so. So I think that's it. That's where we are today. We're very excited, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have, assuming I can. Thank you very much, Mike. Karen.
Thank you. Thank you, Rob.
Yes, thank you, Rob, and thank you, Mike, both for that information. Hopefully it was helpful for the folks that are participating. We have quite a few questions that have come in during that time. We also have some that came in actually before the meeting began, and we'll start with those. I have, hold on. First question I have here is from Carrie Donovan. Does the MOU between the MRC and DTE include a restriction on bringing in out-of-state sewer sludge? I know that there's already a restriction on bringing in out-of-state household waste. Mike, sorry, not Mike, John, our legal counsel from Eaton Peabody, could you address that question, please?
Yeah, thanks, Karen. I think the best way to respond to that is, as was just described in the presentation, the focus is to reopen the facility under the current facility permits and licenses. That's not within the scope of that. And, that's part of all the agreements and the processes going forward. So out-of-state sludge, I think, was the question. That's just not within the scope of the current licenses for the facility.
If I could add something to that, Karen, please.
Sure.
Okay, so I know there's been some things said in newspaper articles, and yes, John is correct about the legal aspects and permits. We are not bringing in any sewage sludge into that facility whatsoever to get this place running. Emphatically want to say that. When the time comes to make some modifications later on, a year or two down the road, that may become an issue we want to do. Certainly not needed from out of state, but that requires new permits, as John has said, and we'll work on that later. That's not my focus. We are not bringing any sewage sludge in.
Great, thank you. Jessica, I think there were a few other questions that came in before the meeting started. If you could provide those, we can address them.
Yes. The first was, does the MOU between the MRC and DTE include a restriction on bringing in out-of-state sewer sludge? I believe that was probably just answered.
We just answered that.
And then next we have if the member town does not approve of one or more items to be approved, does that leave them free to seek other options?
So that's a question for John.
For John, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I understand the question. So as Mike had mentioned, there are certain aspects of the transaction that involve what he said, fundamental matters. That's comes from MRC's bylaws. So what that means is as Mike mentioned, a notice is going to go out to all the members. The board has authorized the transaction to move forward. There'll be much more detail in this notice that's going to be going out, but in a nutshell, there is a process available. The members will get a summary of the fundamental matters that are proposed. They have the ability to call a special meeting if there wants to be further discussion and a vote of the membership on that. That's not a requirement, certainly is not mandatory. If that does not happen, then the transaction simply moves forward as authorized by the board. So the members certainly have a review of the matters and a potential say, and that all will be detailed in the notice that will be forthcoming quite soon to the members.
But it is the case that it's not an individual member's choice as to whether or not they stay or go. It's the majority sense of the members, essentially, process. Yeah.
Correct.
Sophie.
I would just also clarify a little bit more, Karen, that it's a vote of the members and that members are given, it's a weighted vote. And we signed on to that when we signed the joinder agreement. So it's not a number of members, it's a number of votes that create the majority.
That's correct, yes. And all of this is outlined in MRC's bylaws, which were amended and restated, I guess, back in, I think it was 2018. Those are available on MRC's website under the document section. So, and as John mentioned, each member will be getting a detailed notice that will also elaborate on that. So, Jessica, were there any other questions that you received prior to the meeting?
All of the other questions have been put into the Q&A feature.
Great, thank you. Okay, so moving to that, we have another question here from Jim Villette. Who are the bondholders? Jonathan, could you see if you could explain that for folks?
I think I'll do my best. I'm not sure the full context of the question, but I mean, the bondholders, they are the principal creditor to the coastal facility. Through that loan arrangement, they have creditor rights. So, you know, they are the principal driving force, if you will, in terms of, because there's a default in the loan, you know, they essentially are selling the assets to to DTE-HM as the purchaser. The bondholders as a creditor are made up of a number of folks, but that's who they are in the context of this transition and transaction.
Great, thank you. A few more questions from Jim Villette. He has a number of questions today. This one is for you, Rob. Actually, there are two questions. One is, who owns DTE and what are DTE's current operations? Not their past operations or contracts, but their current ones.
DTE is a privately owned company, and I am the majority shareholder. I have funded this company since day one personally, 11 plus years. And the other shareholders are members of my team, because I believe everyone should be a shareholder to the extent that we can. I hope that answers that question. As far as current operations, as I might have mentioned to some of you previously, we've run a DTE facility in South Jersey, outside of Atlantic City, and also currently in North Central Pennsylvania, just outside of Williamsport, Pennsylvania.
Thank you. We have I think more of a comment from one of the members here. I'm going to read into the record here from Bill Lippincott. So he's asking if I could present this. Let's see. It's a little hard because he had to do it in 3 sections. I guess there's a word limit in the Q&A feature. He has read in the Bangor Daily News that Delta Thermal Energy specializes in waste energy process mixing wastewater sludge with household trash to burn to produce electricity, and that they were looking to employ this technology at the Fiberite plant in the future. So it seems a strong possibility that sometime in the future, DTE will seek to change the agreement and request new permits to allow them to process and incinerate sewage sludge. This is particularly of concern because studies show that toxic PFAS chemicals that contaminate sewage sludge will not be destroyed by such a process, but just be moved around in the air and ash. I had heard at a past meeting that MRC's agreement with Delta Thermo does not allow sludge as an acceptable waste. But can you give us a definitive statement that the MRC will not change that agreement in the future, that the MRC will never allow sewage sludge as an acceptable waste to this plant? I'd like to respond to that. We've answered yes?
I'd like to address this issue.
Well, I think you did address the issue, Rob, saying that it's a question for the future. And I would like to also state that it's a question for the future and more ultimately a question for the state. Should this be something that is desirable to pursue in the future, it will need to go through a full environmental review and analysis process. And I can speak personally, I'd be very interested in finding out a new technology to help deal with sewage sludge. And one that is that will destroy the PFAS chemicals. I'd be thrilled if Delta Thermal could come up with a way to handle that and assist the state in dealing with this issue. So I don't think it's in the place for MRC to say definitively that something will never happen, but the current agreements, as Jonathan indicated, do not allow this. So much process and much review would need to go into any consideration in the future of implementing such a technology. Rob, do you have something that you'd like to add to that?
I do. Again, something has been mentioned in discussions and or newspaper articles, and I want to make sure that I set the record straight. There is going to be no burning of anything today, tomorrow, in the future. That's not what we do. The concept of incineration or burning something to create electricity, yes, it can be done. We don't do that. We believe whether it's the pulp or maybe in the future, a different process that creates what we call a pulverized fuel, that's all it is, not electricity. So we're not burning anything in that plant, none whatsoever, and there won't be any burning type emissions whatsoever. And as Karen said, the issue of the waste, the sewage sludge, that's a thing potentially in the future.
Thanks, Rob. All right, let's see what else we have here. We have a couple questions about plant operations. One is for you, Rob. Will you be using local unionized labor in your operations? And they're also interested in knowing which entity will manage the operations. This is from Aunt Blasi.
We plan on operating the facility ourselves with our own people. The people that we're going to be hiring will be working for us, not some third party. I think that in the past that was a mistake for a whole variety of reasons. I don't want finger pointing. If we take over, we're responsible, period. What was there was a second part to that question. Oh, union. I'd like to, I have nothing against unions, but I prefer to be non-union.
Okay. Another question from Jim Villette here. Who will select the members of the Citizen Advisory Board? And I guess I would say, I'm not sure if Mike or John would have a comment about this, but I guess we need to determine that. This is a concept that's new that hasn't been discussed yet. So,
if I could comment, Karen,
sure.
Typically, it's more difficult to get volunteers to do it more than us selecting it. So with Mike and your help, you can reach out to the communities and see who would be interested in joining us, and then we can decide.
Yeah, so it's a discussion for the future.
Right.
One thing, Karen, is we do have our survey that we never do the plant closing let out. So that could be something that could easily be added to the survey that we had if somebody had an interest when we roll that out.
The other point is that we do also have the the monthly meetings that we'll be having. That's essentially the oversight committee. So we'll have to see how further member participation would integrate into that if needed. Yes, Sophie?
So I understand that this sounds like a great idea. I'm a little bit taken aback that it's thrown out in a public board meeting when we're still working through terms of sales and what our contracts might look like. It's bigger than an idea because there is a whole contractual structure to MRC's relationships with our members, to the way the MRC board operates. And if we're going to have a conversation about this, I would much prefer to be able to have some background as opposed to just throwing ideas out. And I'm really not happy with that.
Thank you, Sophie. Well stated, good points. Okay. We have a question from Philip Bloomstein. I would like to see you prioritize startup to municipalities currently sending to landfill. These municipalities have been very unhappy with the current status. This includes my town of Freedom. And Mike, I don't know if you have a comment about that in terms of.
I do, and we've talked to Rob and we've talked to Zane on that. So what we were doing prior to hitting commercial operations, we always had the communities tiered. So there's a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 communities, and the tiers are designed so that we try to get into the plan is first, is anybody going to landfill or that's currently mixing their recyclables. So yes, everything's already divided by tier so that it is, if there is some type of ramp up phase or a certain amount of tonnage, we already know who's doing what, who's going to landfill, who mixes their recyclables, what days they deliver, and their total tonnage that they deliver on. So the nice thing is we have that information all at hand already, and we've been able to, once the deal's complete, but we have shared in the documentations, we'll be able to hand that right off over to DTE to make sure that we can divert that waste as they're doing a ramp or a test phase right to the facility.
Thanks, Mike. A question from CK Brennan. I am a former employee who has not been contacted. Should I be concerned?
Can I answer that?
Sure.
CK, I don't know if that's what you go by, but I will inform Carroll Wallace today to make sure she contacts you. It's probably just an oversight. I don't really know, but I'll find out. Thank you for bringing that up.
Thanks, Rob. Question from Louise Brodman. Will all transaction documents and fundamental notices be placed on the MRC website? And I will say yes when they are available in public. Certainly the fundamental matters notice will be placed on the website. We're hoping to have that completed and put in the mail this week. So in terms of the transaction documents, John, you can correct me when I'm wrong, if I'm wrong, but I believe those will essentially be public once they're submitted to the court and the court process has gotten underway. So there'll be a process through requesting court records to be able to see all the actual documents. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's a fair expectation that once the court process commences, we'll be in a position where, frankly, all those documents will be in kind of what I'll call execution or form, and that would be the time when they could be available.
And somewhat related to that, we have a question from Amy Calder about whether we can reveal the purchase price. And I think at this time, that is not subject to public disclosure because the documents are not in final form. But once it does get to the court, that information will be contained in those documents. Is that correct, John?
Yes.
Okay. And we think that's going to happen within the next 2 to 3 weeks, I think. Another question from Louise Brodman. Mr. Van Naarden, does DTE expect to ask the MRC for additional funds?
No.
Thank you. A couple more questions from Louise. More questions for Rob. When you say you run plants in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, does DTE own the plants or just operate the plant for someone else who owns the plant?
We own and operate them.
Great. Will the town still have the opportunity to send single sort recyclables for a reduced tip fee? Oh, sorry, that was from a different person, but yes. Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to answer that because I'm not sure if Rob would be familiar with that, but we are assigning the agreements, and in the current agreement, it does state that the MRC members are entitled to bring recycling into the facility at half of the current tip rate. So that's in our current agreements that we are assigning. So I don't see why that would not continue.
Another question for Rob from Louise Brodman. Does DTE believe it will be able to readily transfer the existing permits into DTE's name?
Based on our conversation with the firm that we've hired to do this work for us, Haley Ward, used to be known as CES, and my conversations with DEP, and with the help of Mike, the answer is yes. We expect that to be done fairly quickly, and that process has already started, actually.
There's a question here from Jim Billette, which I'll entertain, even though it seems like it's already been answered, but he wants to be clear. There won't be any burning of the dried sludge and waste in the plant, but it will be burned as fuel elsewhere, ? So isn't that the same as burning waste? And I would just like to reiterate, there will be no sludge going into that plant under the current operations. In the future, if DTE decides to pursue that technology, it will need to go through a thorough public review and vetting process that will be governed by the Maine Department of Environmental Protection. And you and citizens everywhere across the state will have an opportunity to weigh in on that process. So I think that's said and done. Question from John Banks. Rob mentioned possibly putting in a water treatment plant in the future. Please explain what that's for. Is it to treat plant effluent? Why would that be needed in the future? Rob, if you could address that.
Sure. We've developed a water treatment plant, which is basically a bioreactor, which is used in multiple places around the world and here. And that will be installed if and when we put our own technology in. Today, it's not needed. The aerobic digesters that are currently there, we will use. Hope that answers the question.
Karen, and John had actually emailed or put a question in while we were in the finance committee. And I just want to make sure I did quickly touch on it in the presentation, but John had asked about the 1.5 million that was lent to Fiberite. And I want to, in more detail, let him know that is part of this negotiation is we've negotiated with DTE that money will be paid back, the principal of that, and also interest. So the intentions is to have that paid back currently. We will put that back in the same type of account once stable operations have hit. So I hope that answers your question, John, from earlier.
Great, thanks. Question from Louise Brodman. Have the parties, the bondholders, DTE and the MRC, reached the principal agreements, or are negotiations still ongoing? And I will take a stab at this and then John can give it the legalese twist on it. But I would say, yes, negotiations have completed. We've reached agreement on all of the substantive terms. There's a little bit of administrative, corrections and editing needed for the documents to be in 100% final form. But John, if you wanted to talk about what the status of the negotiations are in more detail.
I think that's accurate, Karen. There's with this type of transaction, as mentioned before, it's got a lot of moving parts. It's got a lot of complexity to it. So even if the principal terms and negotiations have been met, there's still a fair amount to get done to line everything up, to fine tune it, refine it, etc. So we are rapidly moving into that phase to get everything in that final form. There are other things that need to occur, as mentioned at the last meeting and mentioned at this meeting, completing the financing review, the court process. We also, as mentioned, have the fundamental matter notices that are going out. So there's a lot of things that come into play, and we're all kind of bringing them and coordinating them together. So, but I think that's a fair characterization that we've reached, I would say, a good pivot or milestone point, and we're focused on moving towards the finish line.
John. A question from Jim Villette. If Mr. Van Naarden is majority owner, what collateral is he using to finance a $90 million plus acquisition? Rob, do you want to address that, or?
First, your $90 million thing is incorrect. The collateral for this acquisition is a function of what the lenders and the investors need. And they'll tell us that once they see the agreements, which
so
hopefully we'll send out this week.
Yeah, so that sort of leads into the next question from Louise Brodman, which is, does DTE have all financing lined up to close? And as you just alluded, they'll be getting these documents, which are now in substantially final form, for their final review, but you feel confident that they will find those terms acceptable. And another question from Louise Brodman: how much are the bondholders owed? I believe the original bond was in the order of $52 million. That's not, I think that's about right. Is that about right, George?
Yeah,
yeah,
that's correct.
Okay. Let's see. Jim Villette has a question. Is Mr. Van Naarden stating that DTE currently owns a facility that is currently operating in New Jersey?
The actual plant in New Jersey was moved to Pennsylvania, so it's currently in Pennsylvania. We had to move it because the building that we were located in had to be torn down. It was a transfer station, and it would have fallen down if we didn't move it. But they're rebuilding it, and then we'll go back in.
Somewhat related to that, from Aunt Blasey, are the plants in Pennsylvania and New Jersey the same model and structure as Fiberite?
No.
Okay. Question from Mark Ward. So unless more than 50% of member towns object to the fundamental matters within 30 days of notification, the sale agreement will move forward. And John, why don't you handle that? Because it's not exactly that. Similar to that, but not exactly. So because of the weighted votes, do you want to address that?
Sure. The voting under the MRC bylaws is weighted, as mentioned earlier, weighted based on tonnage from the MRC, each MRC member. So I think it's 100 tons equates to one vote. So if there happened to be a meeting and there was a vote, that would be the voting mechanism, if you will, or vote counts. So if it's approved, if it's approved. If not, then it wouldn't be as it relates to the fundamental matter aspects, and we would deal with it at that point. But as what happened last week, the board has authorized that. That's the first step in the fundamental process. The next step is the notice and called MRC member review and consideration of those fundamental matters.
Aaron, can I add something to that?
Yes.
I just want to remind everybody, it's not our facility to sell. So even if the fundamental matters didn't get approved, it doesn't mean that the facility won't get sold. And it doesn't also mean that we still wouldn't contract with the facility, then those changes just wouldn't happen in the agreements. So I think that's important, because I believe at the end of the question, it's said the sale wouldn't go through. And that's not the case at all. It's not our facility to sell. The fundamental matters are some changes that have been requested in the agreements. And if those weren't to go through, it doesn't necessarily say that the deal still would not happen.
Well, but it is the case that the large portion of the value of the plant is the master waste supply agreement and the contract for the waste that MRC provides. So they do go hand in hand to a certain extent, but you are correct about the technicalities of that. Question from
Kathy has a question, I think.
Oh, sorry, Kathy.
Yeah, so Rob, I'm a little confused by your answer earlier. You had mentioned that you're currently operating 2 plants, one in Pennsylvania and one in New Jersey. Is that separate from the one that was torn down and moved? I guess I'm a little confused about what you're really operating.
The plant that was in New Jersey had to be disassembled and moved because the building had to be rebuilt. So that one was operating for about 3 years and then was disassembled while they rebuild it, and then we'll go back. Currently, we're operating one in North Central Pennsylvania. So at the very current moment, there's only one operating there. Got it?
But the plant, I got it. Yeah, I got the answer. But the plant in New Jersey is going to reopen. Is that what you're saying?
That's our plan.
For
yeah.
sure.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Well, for sure. I don't know, but yes, that's the plan.
All right. Question from Aunt Blasey. Can the public view your operating budget? Will you need additional funding to operate? Where will you request additional funding if you do? Yes, the MRC's budget for 2021 is available. Actually, I think in prior year budgets are available on the MRC website under the document section. And the budget set for this year, we don't anticipate needing any additional funds to operate. If we did need additional funds, we would at a public board meeting need to consider a budget amendment to reflect that, to identify the additional costs and where the source of the additional revenues to support that. So Steve Lewis is asking, you've mentioned get reimbursed for loans, et cetera, but no mention of legal fees. Is the MRC on the hook for all of our own legal fees resulting from this? That number has to be a fairly large number.
No, we've been tracking all the expenses over the last year, and as part of our negotiation, we've negotiated reimbursement for all our transactions.
Thanks. Louise Brodman is asking whether DTE has had meetings with the Maine DEP to discuss a permit to process sludge.
No, because that's not on the table right now.
Thank you. Louise Brodman would like to know how you would compare the DTE plant in Pennsylvania to the Hampden plant. How much waste is processed at the DTE plant in Pennsylvania?
The DTE plant in Pennsylvania is nothing like the one in Hampden. That uses our technology called hydrothermal decomposition. So there's no way to compare it.
Okay. John Banks is asking, does the financing plan anticipate approaching fame? I will say no. Do you have anything addition to add to that, Rob?
What's fame?
Right. So there you go. No.
Yeah.
What is it? What is it?
It's the Finance Authority of Maine. They often provide low interest economic development related loans to entities.
Oh, I see. Our fundraising will cover both acquisition and operations. In fact, it's much more than that. But we will go after the state of Maine, go after, it's the wrong words. We will apply for and try to access grants, rebates, like opportunity zone stuff. And there's all kinds of different programs that I'm sure the state of Maine has. We haven't even started to look at it. We know we did that in New Jersey and Pennsylvania and also in New York for a plant that we're currently negotiating. So the idea that I don't know if fame is the right organization to do that through yet, but yeah, we will try to get as many of those. If they're available to us, we'll go after them. I guess that's the right answer. But we don't need any more financing.
All right, thanks, Rob. Another question from Jim Villette. They want to know what the volume of waste is that you handle in your plant in Pennsylvania.
I can't divulge that number.
Okay. Aunt Blasi wants to know, would you consider approaching the Eastern Maine Development Corporation? And I think that's kind of the same answer as you just gave. Once you find out what it is, maybe you would approach them. I don't know.
I don't know anything about them, but sure.
And Karen, just to be mindful of time, we're creeping up on an hour here.
Yes. Well, and that just cleared our answer queue. So I'd like to thank everybody for your questions very much.
Actually, if I could just interrupt, we did have a couple of other questions come in on the Facebook Live.
All right, come on, you shoot them out. We'll do them real quick.
Sure. We've got, what is the purpose of a receiver at this point?
John, can you quickly give us a high level on that?
So high level, the purpose of a receiver is essentially someone who's authorized and appointed by the court to conduct, to seek approval and conduct a sale process. So that would be the primary role of the receiver in this particular instance.
Thanks.
And then just one more question from D. Palmer. Is there any new information on the possible misrepresentation of some of DTE's associations or partnerships?
What's this?
I would say we have no comment. I don't know what you're talking about. So without more clarification, we'll move on. So with that, I think we'll conclude our presentation section and we'll move on to our regular meeting agenda. Thank you again for your comments, Rob and Mike and John and others, and for all the questions. We do appreciate it. And we do look forward to having more opportunities for Rob to be talking to you all and taking more questions and answers as the plant reopens and we get operations underway.
Yes,
right.
Thank you. Thank you, Rob, for joining us, and it was an excellent presentation. Thank you.
Can I drop off now?
You are welcome to drop off. Get to work.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rob.
All right, thank you all, and thank you for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, so our item on the agenda that we're considering is the consideration of minutes of the special meetings of February 17th, March 9th, 17th, 23rd, 25th of 2021, and the quarterly meeting of January 27th, 2021. Do we have a motion?
I move approval of those minutes.
Second it.
We have a motion and a second. Any comments or corrections? I actually had just one comment or potential correction in the January 27th minutes under the executive director's report. It had some figures for tonnage, and it said that it processed waste from members in 2021 totaling 107,000 tons. I'm assuming those dates are 1 year off in both directions. So if you could look at that and make sure those are correct.
That would have been for 2020. I apologize.
Right. And then there was another number for the prior year, presumably, which would have been maybe 2019. So
Yes.
thanks.
So the comparison is for 2019, and then the year stated is for 2020.
Great. All right, Jonathan.
I I have that in my executive report today, so I'll make sure I give the right year.
Johnny, call the roll, please.
Sure. Kevin. Oh, you're still on mute, Kevin. I think I heard a yes, Kevin. Yes?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Bob,
Yes.
Melissa,
Yes.
Dana,
Yes.
Kathy,
Yes.
Sophie,
Yes.
thank you. Tony,
Yes.
and Karen.
Yes. Thank you. Next up is our asset management report by George Aronson. This includes discussion of the custody account, the tip fee and operating stabilization funds, the cash collateral account, reserve fund update, and first quarter joining member cash distributions. George?
Okay, thank you, Karen, and for everyone. So again, it's the asset management report as of April 1st. There are a number, again, if there are transactions to be closed in second quarter, that will represent a lot of activity, but we're just looking through and as of April 1st. So that activity would, if there's a closing, that activity would be reflected in the next quarter. However, there are some details that do reflect anticipation, and in particular, for example, the balance sheet still reflects the interim loan as an asset because it's in anticipation of a repayment of the loan as part of the purchase agreements. There are a few other items like that in terms of payables and receivables where we're projecting forward, but the position is as of April 1st. I do want to say that the last audit period ended on December 31st of 2020, so books have been compiled, provided to the auditor. That will take some time. Typically, the auditor doesn't work on the MRC books until after April 15th, and sometimes it's delayed for a few months after that. But the books have been turned over, and we're back to a calendar year basis for the audit going forward, which has been a position expressed by the board in prior meetings. Regarding, and I'll just go through this fairly quickly, the assets are set forth in table 1. Within the year, reflecting the new purposes of the funds, some of the accounts have been renamed. What I've tried to do in the letter is show the new name, but keep the old name in parentheses, at least for now, so people who are used to the old names can follow the change until we're familiar with it. So, for example, I have a balance of the development and distribution account, which was formerly the custody account. It's a balance that's used for a number of purposes, and it varies widely. Right now, it's $28,876.23 as of April 1st. We're showing receivables on the balance sheet, the tip fee stabilization fund balance, which is approximately $5.25 million in market value of investments in cash and accrued interest managed by First National Bank. There's a contingency account, which was formerly the operating budget stabilization account, and that balance was $186,756. That balance fluctuated because it's used for now to pay disposal costs, and it's used to collect tip fees from the joining members. So when the payments go out, the balance is low. When the tip fees come in, the balance goes back up, and there's a cash flow need and working capital need in that account as well. Again, after the transaction that's anticipated, that account would stabilize much more and revert to its prior status when it was not used for those purposes. There's a cash collateral agency account balance, which is just over $1.5 million, basically $1.5 million plus some of the accumulated interest. And again, that has purposes in the agreements. It's affected by the transaction going forward. We'll come back to that in June after we know what the final arrangement has been. The loan principal, People have asked, what's the amount at which the site is carried on the MRC's books right now? As of April 1st, it's $6.214,505.22, just over $6.2 million. We also are showing payables on the balance sheet related to both distributions, which I'll get to in a minute, and accrued disposal cost payments as of the end of the month, as of April 1st. Accounting for the assets and the total liabilities, the MRC had a net position for the benefit of joining members of $14,983,486.22 as of April 1st. And then I'm not going to go through all the transactions, but we reconcile the changes in position with the changes in cash, so we know where everything came in and went out. As we go through it, there are 3 recommendations. The first is the quarterly distribution of funds back to the joining members, and that's in accordance with the joinder agreement, the $5 a ton for joining members that were equity charters and $3 a ton for those were new charters. It's all laid out in the exhibit. The total recommendation for the calculation is $126,636.89. That is typically funded from funds held within the TIFI stabilization fund. So we're recommending a transfer of $125,000 to cover the distributions. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier in Finance Committee, we're looking at a transfer of $100,000 from the TIFI stabilization fund to the contingency account, which is formerly the operating budget stabilization account. That account has a balance that fluctuates greatly depending on the timing of payments for disposal of bypass and when the tip fees are collected. Typically, the payment has to be made before the collection is made, so we need some working capital. That would add a little bit of margin to the working capital, and we're just doing that as we have in prior quarterly meetings. Finally, at the end, I have a table that I put in every quarter, which lays out the reserve fund requirements from the joinder agreements and just lists the resources that satisfy those. And again, the MRC is in satisfaction of all its reserve requirements under the joinder agreements, with some amount of unrestricted balance remaining. If the transaction goes forward as contemplated, there will be some significant changes to those amounts, since the MRC is expecting to receive money out of the closing. But when that happens, we'll make those changes and report on them at the next quarterly meeting. At this point, when they're not done, we'll wait and just show you the position as of April 1st. So that's the overview. 3 recommendations: the distribution, the transfer to pay for the distribution, and the transfer for covering working capital for the contingency account. And I'm happy to answer questions.
I'd like to make a motion if it's appropriate.
Sure.
The motion is to transfer, to pay quarterly distributions to joining members in the amount of $126,636.89, to transfer from the target value reserve fund to the D&D account to fund the distributions just mentioned, $125,000, and to authorize $100,000 from the tip fee stabilization fund to the contingency fund to cover possible future working capital requirements for disposal services.
I'll second what he said. Oh.
Kathy can second if I can talk.
We have a motion and a second. So Sophie, comment or question?
Yeah, no, it's a comment. And, George just rattled off a bunch of very well, eloquent summary of his asset management report. I continue to be amazed at the information that he manages to pack into that report for us every quarter. But even more than being amazed at the detail that we get, he continues to be spot on. I don't know if folks realize that this is what he told us. He told us we were going to be here last quarter, and we are almost equal to where he said we were going to be. And I think George sits in the Hollywood squares and sometimes doesn't have to say a lot. I don't know if people really understand how much he gives to the organization. And just wanted to take a minute and
He has
recognize
over
that.
30 plus years. Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you.
Tony?
I understand what George brings to the table. And since I joined or got elected to the MRC, I'm just amazed. Thank you, George.
Yes, thank you. And I would like to take the opportunity to remind folks that all of George's asset management reports are available on the MRC website, and they are a trove of information. So if you're interested in knowing more about MRC finances, have at it.
And if I can just say, beyond my embarrassment, thank you for the words of support from the board. And I'm also pleased to be a part of an organization that is as dedicated to transparency on the financial side as the MRC is, because it truly is exemplary. And I want to thank the board for the opportunity to serve in a way that I'm very comfortable serving, given the policies and directions that the MRC puts forth. So thank you.
Thanks, George. Does anybody else have any other questions or comments for George? All right, with that, I believe we need a vote on our motion in a second. John, will you call the roll, please?
Yes. Kevin,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Melissa,
Yes.
Dana,
Yes.
Kathy,
Yes.
Sophie,
Yes,
Tony,
Yes.
and Karen.
Yes, thank you. All right, moving on, we now have our treasurer's report by our esteemed treasurer, Sophie Wilson, which will include consideration of financial statements and the current bills payable. Sophie.
I'm gonna be brief because I think most of the world already saw the finance committee meeting. This is a different world where people are really interested in our finance committee meetings, but our executive director has once again given us a great budget to actual reconciled report. We are 33% collected on revenues, 29% collected on expenses. We are right where we expected to be when we put the budget together. So I think we're in a good place with that. I don't know if board members in general have a concern or questions that they'd like to discuss regarding the budget report that people received.
Sophie, I just want to make a note. If you're looking at the budget report I sent in your board packets, then I had to revise that. The one that Sophie sent out in her financial packet was correct. So if you happen to be looking at the one I sent in your board member budget package, that's why we're at 29%. I had a double entry on communications. So I had a double entry for February and March on communications. So your board packet says 33%, but the proper one went out in the financial packet at 29%.
Okay. It looked like everybody was really comfortable with our budget, which is a wonderful place to be. We have bills payable totaling $49,214.98. We reviewed that in the finance committee. We don't do votes in the finance committee because that's like work. So instead, there was a general nodding of the head that it was recommended that the board pay the bills.
So moved.
I'd move the bills. Second.
All right, motion and a second. Any questions for Sophie or Mike? Seeing none, John, will you call the roll, please?
Yes. Kevin,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Melissa,
Yes.
Dana,
Yes.
Kathy. I think
Yes.
Kathy. Oh, there she is.
No, I'm here. I'm still listening.
All right, thanks. Sophie,
Yes,
Tony,
Yes.
and Karen.
Yes. Okay, moving on. Item 7 on the agenda is review of extension letter regarding the integral capabilities for performance test protocol. And I think, John, this is yours.
Sure, I'll give just a brief refresher. This is nothing new. What the MRC board has been doing over time is extending the time period to reach were called the integral capabilities. This stems back from the initial performance test protocol. We've been extending that time period kind of commensurate with this process where there's been the temporary suspensions of the facility while we're engaged in discussions, and now we're moving towards, I'll say, the final phase of the sale process. So at the last regular board meeting, it was extended to the end of April, I think by this Friday. The recommendation, in keeping with past practice, is to extend that time period once again. In keeping with past practice, we've been doing the quarterly regular board meetings of the board. I believe the next one is July 28th. So the recommendation would be to extend it once again until, I'll say, July 30th, to leave a few days after the July meeting.
Thanks, John. And just to put it into like regular layperson speak, these integral capabilities, while Fiber 8 had reached commercial operations, there were still a few items that were essentially not as refined or to the standard that we were hoping. And so this was essentially a requirement that they meet those final thresholds, something along those lines. And obviously they did not get there. So we've been in this extending period so that it wasn't technically in default, something like that.
Correct.
Sum it up. Okay. And a follow-up question regarding the term of this extension. Are we not extending it for, I mean, obviously they're not going to meet it by the end of July, given the process that needs to unfold, but we're not in a point to extend it for a further time period because the documents haven't been finalized and the sale hasn't been actually completed.
Correct. And I think from my perspective, in July, there may or may not need to be another revisit of this issue. It will depend upon the timing of the closing and other aspects of the transaction.
Okay.
So John, if this deal goes through, this document is null and void.
It may become a moot issue. Yes.
Yeah.
Good. All right. Does anybody have any other questions or comments for John? Did you have a comment, John?
No, I even though it may become moot, still recommended that we extend it.
Yeah. Okay. Do we have a motion from anyone?
I move an extension to July 30th, 2021.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Motion and a second. John, will you call the roll, please?
Yes. Kevin,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Melissa,
Yes.
Dana,
Yes.
Kathy,
Yes.
Sophie,
Yes.
Tony,
Yes.
and Karen.
Yes. Thank you. All right, next up, we have a report from our executive director on what has been happening outside of the details of the sale and anything regarding committee work or committee actions.
Well, I want to thank Bob when he made his motion for using the correct names on the accounts. So, Bob. I'll be brief. Director's report, just a few things. In other arms, MRC business, members total MSW tons for first quarter 2021 was 24,126 tons, which includes the commercial waste estimate of 5,875 tons. Last year's member total MSW for first quarter of 2020 was 23,020 tons, which also includes the commercial waste estimate. An increase year over year is about 1,000 tons. Some recent changes have happened in the DEP office. David Burns, Director Bureau of Waste Management for the DEP, has announced his retirement. David will be retiring at the end of May of this year. Taking David's place will be Suzanne Miller, the current DEP Director of Eastern Maine's Regional Office, based right here in Bangor. Also, Lou Pizzuti, local field agent and licensing and compliance specialist, has accepted another position within the department. I do not believe at this time Lou's predecessor has been announced yet. I want to thank David and Lou on the behalf of the MRC for everything, but also them the best of luck in their new endeavors. They will be missed, but we are also looking forward to working with Suzanne and Lou's replacement. Best of luck to all of you. Versant Power completed the scheduled maintenance last week on the Volt lead line going into PERC. PERC took the opportunity to schedule some of their own maintenance during that downtime, which proved more complicated than anticipated. PERC is taking and processing the MRC MSW that is designated to them. PERC has one boiler operating, but is not currently generating electricity. Parts are on order, and PERC plans to get everything back up and going. MSW annual report in February. Before the DEP deadline, MRC filed a waste report on Coastal's behalf with the DEP. Thanks to the help of George Aronson, MRC's technical consultant, the annual report was filed on time with no issues. And my final item, MRC has been invited to attend Waste Management Expo 2021 conference and sit on the panel for What's New with Mixed Waste. Waste Expo is the largest solid waste recycling and organics event in North America. MRC was honored to be asked to participate in this conference. We have accepted the invitation and we are sending one of our team members to represent the MRC, George Aronson. I want to thank George for taking this on and wish him the best of luck. Make the members proud, George.
Do what I can.
Thank you, everyone. And that's all I have at this time for the executive director's report and committee reports. I want to thank Rob and his team for giving their presentation. And I also want to thank everybody, there's just too many to name, that have been working so closely with us to get this deal completed. And Karen, on the committee side, there's a lot happening in Augusta. We are paying attention to it and putting in anything that we can when we're asked, but a lot going on in the waste world right now.
Great. Thanks, Mike. You definitely have a full plate, overflowing. It's amazing that you're, what a great job you do juggling it all. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions for Mike? No? All right. Of course, he's always an open door, so he's always available for us to answer questions. So appreciate that too. All right, well, that brings us to the end of our agenda. We do not anticipate having an executive session, or we do not need an executive session. So next item up is another public comment period, although I imagine most people's questions have been answered. But if you have a question, please use the Q&A feature. We have one comment here that I'll read while people have an opportunity to voice any other additional questions from Louise Brodman. She just wanted to comment that she thinks that once the sale of the plant occurs in the early months post-closing, that it would behoove the MRC to hold regular monthly meetings to get a report from DTE about how things are going. Picking just a few people who are going to filter that information is not the way to go. We need more accountability, not less. And I appreciate that comment. And I do agree that we want to make sure we're providing information to members on a regular basis about how the reopening plans are going. So thank you very much for that. We know people are anxious to hear more about it now that we have some positive news and some activity towards plant restart. So thank you. Jessica, has anything come in by Facebook?
We really haven't had anything new come in on Facebook. Okay. But I do see one more question that just popped into the Q&A. Okay.
Dick Atley says, I'm curious about the issue of possible sewage sludge being heated. Dick, we addressed that ad nauseum earlier in the meeting, and there will be no sewage sludge going into the plant under the current set of operations. That is a future issue that will be vetted by the Maine Department of Environment Protection if it ever comes to the point of being asked. So. All right. With that, I think we have gotten to the end of our meeting. Our next regularly scheduled meeting, quarterly meeting, is set for July 28th. again at 10 a.m. and it'll be preceded by the Finance Committee meeting. I do anticipate we'll be having meeting prior to that, so keep an eye out. And if you haven't already, please sign up on the MRC email distribution list where you can get notification of any meetings or communications that we send out to folks. All right, with that, all that we have left is a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Consider it a vote unless doubted. Thank you all very much for your time today. And as always, Mike and other consulting staff, thank you so much for all your work on this process. We're really pleased to be where we're at with regard to the anticipated sale and closing on the finances of the plant. Members, we will be sending out that notice of fundamental matters to you. So look for that in your mailbox early next week. And feel free to contact Mike if you have any further questions. We will be having that information posted on our website. We do also expect to have some additional like frequently asked question type things up there to help answer any questions that people might have. So take a look there. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great day. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.